Think of your child's ADHD symptoms like a fire. For years, I believed that the only way to reduce ADHD symptoms was through medication or various forms of therapy. But both medication and therapy are kind of like shooting a water hose at the smoke instead of actually shooting it at the fire. Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Hello, parents, and welcome back to another edition of the Soaring Child podcast. I'm your host, Dana Kay. Now, in the time we have been sharing this space together, which is, now over 2 years, I simply can't believe it, we've covered countless strategies for managing ADHD symptoms naturally. And despite this, many of you have reached out with stories of frustration when conventional treatments fall short. Today, we're going to delve into why typical ADHD interventions might not be the right fit for every child. This episode is deeply personal to me because it really echoes the struggle I face with my own son when those standard treatments fail to deliver. It's a struggle I know many of you understand all too well. We're here to discuss the limits of these common approaches and introduce more tailored, more thoughtful methods that actually target the core of what your child experiences. If you've ever been puzzled by the effectiveness of traditional methods, then this is your episode. Why typical ADHD treatments don't always work. So let's start with medication, as that is often the go-to treatment plan for many families. The biggest misconception about ADHD in kids is that medication is the only way to treat it. The problem with medications is that they merely mask the symptoms and they don't address those underlying stresses of ADHD. And it often starts with sort of one medication. Sometimes it works really well, but for many children, including my own son, the first medication stops working. And even worse, the meds often have very serious side effects. And so the doctors, they just prescribe a second medication to deal with the side effects of the first medication. And then a third medication. And then a fourth. Yes, my son really was prescribed 4 strong meds, and he was only 5 years old at the time. Now, these strong medications can often have negative effects on children's developing brains and growing bodies that, can affect them for the rest of their lives. There are many underlying stresses that exacerbate ADHD symptoms, and every child is different. There's no blanket one size sort of fits all prescription that addresses what each unique child needs, and that's why meds often don't work. In fact, meds often make ADHD symptoms worse due to the side effects. I remember feeling really, really hopeful that they would work with my son at first, and I was so excited to really go and fill that prescription at the pharmacy or the drugstore. But then when the doctor kept increasing the dosage and adding more medications, I was so afraid of how these medicines would really affect my son long term. Plus, he was experiencing some pretty serious side effects. Now, many parents are hesitant to try these risky medications, and for good reason. The side effects are often worse than the ADHD itself. Now, I've said before, I'm not completely opposed to medication. They have their time and place. but we have to weigh the benefits and the risks. And often the benefits don't last long and the risks can be quite serious. So even though medication is often that first port of call for many kids with ADHD, it can definitely fall short and end up leaving families feeling discouraged and really unsure where to turn next. So that's medication. But let's move on to supplementation, okay? Many parents have come to me and asked, why do all of the supplements I seem to try do absolutely nothing for my child with ADHD? So I first want to say that the supplements can be super effective and healing in the body. But first, parents need to be sure they are supplementing correctly. It's not as simple as giving a child more magnesium or a fish oil or probiotics. Maybe it works, but it usually doesn't. We supplement based on a child's unique needs and not use a one-size-fits-all approach, because one size doesn't fit all. Shockingly, many supplements also have quality problems. They often don't have as much of the active ingredient as the label says. They can be expired, but the label as not expired. Some have cheap fillers and low quality additives that contributes to inflammation. We'll come back onto inflammation at the end, but many are manufactured and stored in dirty or unsanitary conditions. Supplements can help if you buy quality ones that are stored correctly and made from high quality ingredients. But even these high quality supplements are not enough on their own. If a child's ADHD symptoms are linked to a deficiency of, say, micronutrients and minerals, supplements can help. But here's the problem. Most parents don't know which micronutrients or minerals or vitamins their children actually need. And sometimes the deficiency doesn't necessarily mean that the child needs to consume more of that mineral or more of that vitamin. It could be that the child's body or gut isn't absorbing the minerals properly. So when it comes to supplementation, unfortunately, most parents are merely guessing. Definitely no judgment here. I did this too. And I call this blind supplementation, trying a supplement because of an article we read online or a comment we saw on social media. Maybe it works, but it's rare. And it's so easy to waste lots and lots of money. That's what I did, with this guesswork approach. And even more importantly, we can lose months or years of our children's valuable development time. How our children develop in their childhood affects them for the rest of their lives. And if their development is impaired because of ADHD, that will affect their behavior at school, their ability to make friends, their ability to regulate their emotions, their social skills, and so much more. And those all affect them into their teen years and well into adulthood as well. So in other words, we don't have time to lose with blind supplementation. We don't have time to spare with random guesswork approaches. For our children's sake, we have to act now. So that's medication and supplementation. But other parents also ask me, what about therapy? I tried therapy for my son for over a year after spending so much money, taking him out of school, missing my own work time. We sacrificed a lot to try therapy for my son, and for him, it did not help at all, not even a little bit. Not only did it not work for my son, I've heard from parents all across the country who tried all kinds of therapy. We've got, behavioral therapy, play therapy, cognitive therapy, and these parents all say the same thing. The therapy didn't help very much. Sure, therapy can help a little bit in some cases, but it also doesn't address why children exhibit challenging ADHD symptoms in the first place. Therapy can be effective, but it's not the most impactful way of reducing ADHD symptoms for the vast majority of children. And even when it is helpful, it only helps so much. Now, another common question I get is, what about parent coaching? Many well-meaning parents will read books, speak to the school counselor, and get advice from a therapist. And while it's really, really valuable to learn effective parenting strategies and really learn to communicate with your child better, those are almost never the reason children experience ADHD symptoms. Now we're going to move on to dietary changes. What about dietary changes? Changing the diet of a child can definitely help, and you'll hear me talk about it all the time. And as you know, if you've been listening to me for long enough, I teach all the families I work with to cut out gluten, dairy, soy, artificial flavors and colors, and excessive sugar, and really replace those foods with micronutrient-rich foods and healthy fats. So diet can definitely make a big difference. But many children with ADHD are picky eaters, and they can act up if they aren't given foods they like. So parents need to be very, very careful and have a plan for introducing new foods. Also, similar to supplementation, there's often a lot of guessing involved. Yes, I was guilty of that too. Which foods are contributing to ADHD symptoms? Which foods should be removed? Which foods should be added in? How long should you test the dietary changes to see if they worked? And how can you ensure that the dietary changes are being followed even when your child is at school and when with other family members or friends? And we can't just play a guessing game. We need a plan. Now, unfortunately, there is a common mistake I see as parents try to remove different foods. Often, ADHD symptoms get worse. This is because as foods are removed, they weren't done in a systemic way. So as foods are removed, children don't get as much of other certain nutrients that they actually need. We have to be very, very careful when removing foods. So, we know our children are still getting proper nourishment because it's all about that proper nourishment. Now, another question I get is, will my child ever grow out of these ADHD behaviors? And the answer to that is, in my opinion, and from helping over 1,000 families, I've seen that it almost never happens. In fact, I have never seen a child grow out of ADHD without some kind of changes. The difficult behaviors will continue, and more often than not, the behaviors actually get worse. So as children grow, they can develop coping mechanisms and ways to manage their ADHD, but those underlying triggers and stresses of ADHD continue to persist, meaning they will continue to experience that emotional dysregulation, that lack of focus, and that, impaired brain function. And these sort of will continue into their teen years and even adulthood. Each day the ADHD symptoms persist is another day of reduced physical and mental development. The truth is, most ADHD strategies, the ones we've talked about in this podcast so far, so it's a medication, supplementation, therapy, parent therapy, these standalone strategies often miss the mark in addressing the real issue. Instead, they only address the symptoms. Now, in other words, they put a Band-Aid on symptoms. Think of your child's ADHD symptoms like a fire. For years, I believed that the only way to reduce ADHD symptoms was through medication or various forms of therapy. But both medication and therapy are kind of like shooting a water hose at the smoke instead of actually shooting it at the fire. when a house fire breaks out and the emergency responders arrive, they don't aim their hoses at the smoke, do they? They aim them at the fire. They know that if they get that fire out, that smoke will eventually dissipate. And it's the same way with our children's ADHD symptoms. If we aim for the fire, in our case, those underlying stresses in the body that are actually causing those symptoms, the smoke or the symptoms will eventually dissipate. But if all we do is flood the smoke with water, we never actually even touch the problem below. So I hope this is making sense so far to you. Look, the reason traditional ADHD treatments don't work long term is because they are focusing on symptom management. They're not addressing the underlying stresses of the ADHD. So you've stuck with me for this long and you're probably wondering, what is the real issue? What is sort of that underlying stressor that I keep talking about that needs to be targeted? Do you want to hear it? Okay, it's inflammation. You've probably heard that word before. It might not sound like a big deal, but the World Health Organization actually ranks chronic inflammatory diseases as the greatest threat to human health. So what is it? What is inflammation? Now, inflammation is a response by the body's immune system to fight off infection, to heal damaged tissue, or to clean out toxic substances and pathogens in our body. It is normal for the body to induce inflammation in certain cases, such as, when we get sick, we have a cold, or we get a cut on our finger. But when the inflammation is constant and ongoing, that is a sign that the body is in major defense and cleanup mode. I have this really, really funny analogy I like to use to explain it. We all have a metaphorical trash can in our body. And as we go through our lives, the trash can gets filled up. It gets filled with poor diet, toxic medications, too much sugar, bacteria, viruses, things like that. And just like with real trash cans, we're meant to empty the trash can on a regular basis, aren't we? So we put it outside the curb every Monday for that garbage truck to take away the trash. Now, in our body, this process is actually called detoxification. Our body has detoxification pathways that clean out that trash, those toxins, those viruses, that bacteria or other foreign substances that really negatively affect our health. And what I have learned in helping over 1,000 children with ADHD, they can't effectively empty their trash can. And so what's actually happening to our kids is that trash just builds up too fast in their body and it isn't getting cleared out. They're not able to take it out to the curb on Monday to empty it because their detoxification pathways, they're compromised. And with compromised detoxification pathways, the trash, what happens? It overflows into their body and that causes inflammation. Their body and brain are in a very, very high state of inflammation. And that inflammation, guess what it does? It exacerbates ADHD symptoms. So we really need to reduce the load on the trash can and help them empty it. Okay, in summary, that was a lot. Inflammation leads to those difficult ADHD symptoms, and that inflammation is the result of high toxin exposure and compromised detoxification pathways. So that leads us to a few questions. How do we identify all these toxins? How do we reduce our children's exposure to these toxins? How do we increase functioning of the detoxification pathways? And how do we reduce the inflammations in their body, in their brain, and in their gut? This is where my 3-step blueprint comes in. And I have a free ADHD masterclass where I share all about these 3 steps, this 3-step blueprint. I'm going to add that link to the fast class in the show notes below. So make sure and check that out after the podcast ends. Now, if this episode has sparked new thoughts or given you hope, just consider sharing this with others who might be on a similar path. Your support by spreading the word can make a significant difference. And if you have a moment, I'd be so grateful if you could leave a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also assists so many families out there who could really, really benefit from our shared experiences and our insights. Guys, thanks for tuning in today and joining me. And here's to fewer ADHD symptoms, because you're learning how to get to the bottom of what's really underneath those symptoms. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at adhdthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.